tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So there's a set of 8 training verses which were one of the first teachings I heard in the Tibetan lineage. Who here's heard of these, the Tibetan mind trainings? They're a profound set of 8. And they go roughly as follows. They're written by a teacher named, I think, Kadampa Longri Tangpa in the 12th century, with the aspiration, with the highest aspiration, for the sake of all beings, I will constantly practice holding them dear. Whenever I interact with anyone, I will consider myself the lowest of all and respectfully hold others as supreme. In all actions, I will probe my mind, and whenever I see an unwholesome defilement arise, I will confront and avert it, as it is damaging to myself and others. Whenever I encounter a being overcome by suffering, unwholesome, I will hold them close, for they are rare to find. When others, out of jealousy, mistreat me with abuse and slander, I will accept upon myself defeat and offer the victory to them. When someone in whom I have placed great trust hurts me, I will hold them as my precious teacher. In short, I will take upon myself the sufferings of all beings quietly and offer all happiness to all beings, my mothers. Holding all of these untouched by the 8 worldly winds, I will perceive emptiness. So what a profound set of 8. And it reminds me, well, first the caveat that obviously these have to be held skillfully at the right time. There are places where you should not offer defeat or offer victory to the other. There are places where you should not hold yourself as the lowest of all. And it reminds me of a Seinfeld episode where George Costanza decides he'll do everything the opposite of what he would usually do. And he's very, very happy the whole episode. We think we've lost paradise. And yet when you alter your sight just a little bit, you see the trees of light between the trees of wood, of material in the woods. And in a sense, this is our Eden, that if we were able to perceive the world in a photographic negative, in a sense, that we would be able to perhaps find the peace and luminosity that we so seek. And there's a sutta where the Buddha says that what the world perceives as suffering, the noble ones perceive as happiness, and what the noble ones perceive as happiness, what the noble ones perceive as suffering, the world perceives as happiness. And what these mind trainings do is, for me, they offer us a chance to step out of the usual metrics which grip us, the comparison and the constant clawing of the ego to make itself known and supreme. And when we step aside from that whole machination, we find that there's a hidden majesty on the other end. This is, I think, the meaning of Buddhist grace, is this movement through the Four Noble Truths where you understand, comprehend dukkha, suffering, and facing it, understanding it, to stand under it. This is the duty with the first noble truth. And let go of craving, which is the second noble truth. You find that there's a peace, the third noble truth, and then the path beyond reveals itself, the fourth. But the sense that if we're able to allow the ego to just vibrate itself out, to look beyond it, to duck under it, then on the other side of that dark valley, on the other side of the ego screaming to be heard or seen, of the doubt demanding to be solved immediately, if we just hold still long enough, if we still our palsied shaking long enough, that then we find on the other end there's a quiet and a peace waiting for us. It reminds me of the T.S. Eliot verse I've quoted before. Wait without hope, because you're not ready for hope. Wait without love, because love would be love of the wrong thing. Wait without hope, because hope would be hope for the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the hope and the love are all in the waiting. So this first verse, with the aspiration for the benefit of all beings, I will constantly practice holding them dear. And just the sense of opening the heart with that simple wish of benevolence, of metta, of loving kindness. We've spoken about this before, how of the three wrong intentions in Buddhism, or of the three right intentions, you have the intention towards renunciation, the intention towards non-ill will, and the intention towards non-cruelty. And it's so significant that out of the three of those, two of those have to do with not dwelling in aversion, and how we can live our whole lives in this low-grade hum of aversion. And so just to make this a priority to every morning when you wake up, try to find a doorway into the Brahma Viharas, into these abodes of loving kindness in the heart. Think, may all the little beings around me be well. Think of the little spider in the bathroom, of the birds in the trees around you, of the squirrel huddled up trying to keep warm outside. Just whatever it takes to invoke loving kindness, of your child in the bed downstairs, of your parent in the house across the city, of your father or your mother gazing at you with love, of that gentle pearl of goodness which hides just in the heart right here. What does it take to open constantly to holding beings dear? And to understand that this highest aspiration, the aspiration for awakening, is never at odds with that. That when you begin to practice and meditate, the world often says that you're neglecting your duty to it, and it'll call you back to the usual activities and scrambling. But not to trust that, to trust that if you clean and clarify the heart, you are giving the greatest gift you could possibly give the world. This has to be held in tandem with doing one's duty to one's loved ones, to one's society, to one's job, etc. But that the greatest gift we can give is the pure heart. And I've seen so clearly the effect that the pure heart has echoing out. The second, that whenever I interact with another, I will hold myself as lowest of all and respectfully hold others as supreme. So obviously this has to be held with wisdom. If you have extremely low self-esteem or always sort of give way, then you have to hold this carefully. But so often you might find that the subtle way your ego manifests is in its orientation towards your loved one, your spouse, your coworker, where you just aren't quite willing to give in to their way of looking at things. Where it's them again, the exasperation, the contempt, the subtle contempt. Ajahn and I may have read a marriage book once together. And one of the 4 horsemen of divorce is contempt. We're in good stead. But we aren't even allowed to ride horses by Vinaya. But just to say, this sense of subtle contempt and negotiation and comparison, and what happens when you just bring into that constant dynamic with another, let me hold myself as lowest of all and respectfully hold the other as supreme. How that lets you duck under the whole conflict and just allow yourself to find that hidden peace and majesty and relinquishment, patinisaga, chaga. In Buddhism, this word for relinquishment and giving, chaga, it's one and the same, chaga. It means to release the open hand. What happens when you're able to just release the ego? Let me hold myself lowest of all and respectfully hold another as supreme. And also to see that although your view may be right in some ways, what does it mean to understand the truth hiding behind the other person's view? And even now, coming into the new year, what would it mean to go back to your husband, your wife, your child, your parent, and not justifying yourself, not justifying your position in whatever dynamic or argument there was or is or will be, but just to acknowledge where you have fallen short, because we've all fallen short somewhere, and just to begin by asking forgiveness for that, and not to follow it up. What was it? We always ruin good apologies with excuses. Not to follow it up with a justification or demand for some return apology, but just what would it mean to go back home this morning, and although this is pretty hard when you haven't slept at all, so maybe wait 2 days, but just to say, I'm sorry. I know I haven't been perfect, but I acknowledge the truth in what you're saying as well. The third, whenever I interact with anyone, I will keep careful watch over my mind, and whenever an unwholesome state arises, firmly confront and avert it. How with those we love, we lose our vigilance, and we can justify just being careless with their heart. And there are times where it's okay to let down one's guard. The Buddha said one can interact with wholesome mind states as a cowherd would interact with their cows after the rice had been harvested, sitting under a tree, watching the cows and saying, and this is the quote, "There are those cows." So there are times when you can just be relaxed with those you love, when you're in a good place. But the Buddha says, interact with unwholesome mind state as a cowherd would before the rice had been harvested, to keep the cows from wandering into the rice fields and eating up all the crops and trampling on the rice seedlings, constantly tapping on them with a stick. So with those we love, when we're not in a good spot, to not use the justification of familiarity to let down vigilance and formality and care and carefulness with our actions and speech. To be very careful and understand we can wound those closest to us so easily. And this is where our practice really is, so often, is with those we're most intimate with, and where the patterns and the self emerge. The fourth, that whenever I encounter a being oppressed by unwholesome states, overcome with suffering, I will hold such a being close as they are a treasure rare to find. How so often our practice is right there at the core wound. How it is the people who are most difficult, where if we're able to truly turn towards them as our teachers and acknowledge what a gift it is to have those beings and situations in the world which really push us to expand the scope of our heart, the breadth of our patience, the depth of our care. This is how we grow as practitioners. And that with such tragedy in our life, whether it be the sickness, the cancer, the death, or with such people, whether it be the boss, the wife, the child, it does not usually work to just accessorize with that particular practice and say, okay, I'll practice with this, okay. So often with suffering like that, you have to turn completely towards it and acknowledge that this is my teacher for this period of my life. This is my biggest teacher, and I have to completely be vigilant and oriented towards running into the wind, running towards moving, placing careful hands on that particular source of difficulty. And this is the George Costanza moment of turning everything upside down, where you understand that those most difficult aspects of your life are really where we learn to grow, and they can be true gifts in that much. I'm reminded of a man I spoke to recently who was a neuroscientist at UW and had a brain tumor, which caused him to have to relinquish his lab that he led, which until then had been his greatest nightmare. And what he found was in the aftermath of the surgery to remove the tumor, his mental capacity was slowed for a time, which was also his greatest fear. And yet this steady grace moved out of that loss, where he found himself able to sit on a bench in front of his house with his spouse for the first time in years and just watch as each slow, gentle thought arose out of the morning. And he was able to he went to each person in his life and he asked, how could I have been better? How could I have caused you less suffering? And he intentionally basically rewired his brain as it regrew into what he thought would be most beneficial to the world. How humility comes from the first noble truth. When we learn to hold difficulty and loss with patience and care, and find that if we're able to relinquish that false and brittle ego, there's room for new growth underneath. The snake sheds its skin, and we find there's a new year, and that because we've cultivated this gentle glow of practice and refuge, we have some new ground, a refuge to step onto. The ego is not all we're left with. Wow, I think we're out of time, and we still have like 5 more. It's okay. What I'll say is, for those final ones, when others out of envy slander me with abuse and scorn, I will humbly accept upon myself defeat and offer the victory to them. When someone in whom I have placed great trust mistreats me, I will hold them as my precious teacher. When, in short, I will offer all happiness to all beings my mothers. And if you believe in rebirth, if you don't even, still can we understand that in a sense there's no reason to, all beings have been our mothers. This is the Tibetan way of thinking about this cycle of rebirth, how we asked Bhante Sumita, that wonderful Sri Lankan monk who visited us. I asked, Bhante, at this point, do you think of yourself as more as Sri Lankan or American? You know, you've been here for about 25 or 30 years. And he said, when I ordained, and he ordained when he was 11 years old as a novice, he said, when I ordained, I stopped being a citizen of any country and became a citizen of the world. And all I have now are brothers and mothers and sisters and fathers. Can we consider ourselves as that much and understand that this world is desperately in need of love? And that is what we give. When we stop letting our view being eclipsed by any one person or relationship or party or identity, we're able to be truly loving without bounds. And this is our duty and our standard as practitioners. So I wish you all the best coming to this new year. Find forgiveness for yourself, for the world, and for those around you. Offer humility where you're able, and trust that humility and majesty on the other end of relinquishment and the open hand is waiting.
Handamayam Dhammakataya